What happens when something you believe with your whole heart is challenged, and not by some outsider, but by your own most sacred texts?
We're about to dive into the incredible story of Muhammad al-Tijani al-Samawi,
Who asked one question and ended up on a path that would completely change his entire world.
Right from the get-go, the author, Muhammad al-Tijani, makes it clear what this is all about. He says this book isn't just about changing your mind. It's for anyone with a healthy mind. He's really setting the stage here for a story about having the courage to follow the evidence, no matter where it leads.
So, who was Dr. al-Tijani before all of this started?
We're talking about a guy who grew up in Tunisia as a devout Sunni Muslim, following the Maliki school of thought. He was also deeply involved in the Tijani Sufi order. After making the pilgrimage to Mecca as a young man, he earned the super-respected title of Hajj. I mean, he was so established he was giving lectures, telling people to stay away from practices he thought were polytheistic. He was a pillar of his community.
So it all starts on a ship, of all places. He's on his way to Beirut, and he strikes up a conversation with an Iraqi university professor. This professor happens to be a Shia Muslim. So al-Tijani starts sharing what he's been taught about Shiism, from the books he's read. And the professor? He doesn't argue, he just listens.
And then after listening patiently, the professor asked this. To be fair and objective, one has to refer to the original sources of the subject, basically asking him, hey, everything you think you know about us, did you learn it from our books or from the books of people who already disagree with us?
So the professor follows up with this incredible invitation. He doesn't offer a debate, he offers an experience. He just says, come to Iraq, I'll host you. Meet our scholars, talk to our people, see for yourself, and then you can make up your own mind, without all the bias from secondhand stories.
Al-Tijani accepts the invitation. He decides to go. So he steps into this world that, up until now, was just an idea to him, an idea he'd been taught to be suspicious of his whole life. His journey through Iraq is just one shock after another, challenging everything he's ever believed. In Baghdad, he sees these rituals at the shrines, and his Wahhabi-influenced side is really uncomfortable. In Najaf, he gets to sit down with some of the top Shia scholars who patiently answer all his tough questions. But it's in Karbala that things really shift.
Suddenly, the story of the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, the Prophet's grandson, isn't just a footnote in a history book. Hearing it there, in Karbala, surrounded by people mourning, it becomes this profound, personal, spiritual event that just shakes him to his very core.
Okay, so just look at this contrast here. On the one hand, you have what he'd been taught his whole life, that the Shia cursed the Prophet's companions, that they had some other different Quran, that their practices were totally deviant. But then, look at what he actually found in Iraq. He meets scholars who calmly and logically explain why that's not the case. He sees with his own eyes that they revered the exact same Holy Quran. He witnesses this deep piety and devotion. I mean, one by one, every single one of those prejudices just starts to fall apart.
Here's a great example. There was this myth that Shia believed the angel Gabriel made a mistake, that the message was meant for Ali, not the Prophet Muhammad. And a scholar in Najaf just broke it down for him with simple logic. He said, how could Gabriel make a mistake and not differentiate between Muhammad the man and Ali the lad?
The scholars didn't just lecture him, they welcomed every single question he had. And then they gave him books, not one or two, but over 70 of them. I mean, think about the confidence that takes. They weren't hiding anything. They threw open their libraries and said, here, read it for yourself. They didn't just give him answers, they gave him the actual tools to find his own.
Okay, now we get to the real climax of this whole intellectual journey. Because the most shocking, world-changing discoveries he made, they didn't come from Shia books. They came from his own.
So he starts reading this book they gave him called al-Muraja'at, which means the correspondences. And it's basically a transcript of a debate, a dialogue between a major Sunni scholar and a Shia scholar. The Shia scholar made his case using arguments and references from books that Sunnis themselves consider 100% authentic. And it's in this book that he first learns about something called the calamity of Thursday, a huge, pivotal event from the Prophet Muhammad's final days. And somehow, in all his 30 years of studying and teaching, he had never, ever heard of it.
So this story goes like this. The Prophet is on his deathbed, and he asks for something to write with so he can write down a final piece of guidance, something he says will keep the Muslim community from ever going astray. But his request is refused. It's actually blocked by a companion, Umar ibn al-Khattab, who says the Prophet was, quote, talking irrationally.
An argument actually breaks out,
right there in the Prophet's room. And in the end, the Prophet just tells everyone to leave. Just imagine the weight of that moment. His first reaction? No way. Absolutely not. He just couldn't wrap his head around it. The idea that one of the most respected companions would defy a direct order from the Prophet like that, it was just unthinkable. He was sure it had to be a fabrication, a story made up by the Shia to discredit the companions.
And then the hammer drops. The moment that shatters everything. The Shia scholar in the book reveals his source for this incredible story. It wasn't some obscure Shia text, it was Sahih al-Bukhari, one of the two most authentic, most revered, most trusted books in his own Sunni tradition. The proof wasn't in their library, it was in his.
This was it, the point of no return. But he's a scholar, right? So he doesn't just take the book's word for it. He literally travels to the capital city, buys his own brand new copies of Sahih al-Bukhari and other major Sunni collections, and he looks it up himself. And there it was, word for word. This forced him to reevaluate, well, everything.
So that one discovery just unlocked a whole new chapter in his life. It kicked off a period of incredibly intense and totally unbiased research.
And look, this wasn't some overnight conversion. We're talking about 3 solid years where he basically just locked himself away with his books. He set a new rule for himself, a new method. He would only rely on evidence that was agreed upon by both Sunni and Shia sources. He was literally, systematically taking apart 30 years of his own beliefs, piece by piece, so he could rebuild his understanding from the ground up, based only on what he could prove.
The calamity of Thursday became the key that unlocked a door he never knew was there. And this wasn't an isolated incident. This table here just scratches the surface of the contradictions that began to pile up. For example, he had always believed the companions were perfectly obedient, but his own Sunni sources described some of them openly disobeying the Prophet's direct order at the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, even after he repeated it 3 times. He believed the first caliph, Abu Bakr, was a paragon of justice. So why did the Prophet's own daughter, Fatima, die so angry with him over an inheritance dispute that she demanded to be buried in secret?
And the examples kept coming. He read about senior companions questioning the Prophet's appointment of a young man, Usama, as a military commander. He studied the Battle of the Camel, a devastating civil war led by the Prophet's own wife, Aisha, against the 4th Caliph, Ali. He found accounts of a celebrated general, Khalid ibn al-Walid, killing a fellow Muslim leader and marrying his widow that very same night. And he learned that a future caliph, Muawiyah, had institutionalized the practice of cursing Ali from the pulpits of mosques across the entire empire.
For al-Tijani, the conclusion became inescapable. The sheer volume of these events, all documented within the annals of his own Sunni tradition, made it impossible for him to maintain the belief that every single companion was a perfect and unerring guide for Muslims to follow.
This discovery naturally led him to the next massive question, the succession to the Prophet. He'd always believed it was a smooth, democratic-like process that led to Abu Bakr becoming the first caliph. But now, reading the histories, it looked a lot more like a rushed political meeting, where key figures like Imam Ali weren't even present. And at the same time, he kept finding more and more evidence, again in Sunni sources, of a major event at a place called Ghadir Khumm, which started to look an awful lot like a public appointment of Ali.
Another huge piece of the puzzle was a famous saying of the Prophet known as Hadith al-Thaqalain. Now, he was familiar with a version that said to follow the Quran and the Prophet's traditions, or Sunnah. But what he found in core collections like Sahih Muslim was a different wording. The Prophet said he was leaving behind 2 weighty things, the Book of Allah and my al-Bayt, my household, my family. For him, that was a game-changing discovery.
So after all that work, after 3 years of cross-referencing and studying, he came to a conclusion that changed absolutely everything for him. Based on the sources that both schools of thought agreed on, he became convinced that the Prophet had in fact designated a successor, his family, the al-Bayt, starting with his cousin and son-in-law, Ali ibn Abi Talib.
And he puts it so clearly in his own words. He says, "Yes, I found the alternative. Praise be to Allah." He declared that he had become a follower of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib. For him, the long, difficult journey of doubt had finally ended in a new, solid conviction.
When you boil it all down, his story is really about intellectual courage. It's incredible. And it kind of leaves us with a pretty challenging question, doesn't it? How much of what we think we know is based on what we've actually checked for ourselves versus what we've just been told? And maybe the bigger question is,
Are we brave enough to follow the evidence, no matter where it takes us?